Pillow talks taxes. He has been for over 45 years, and there isn't a human on the planet with more experience solving tax problems on behalf of taxpayers. He wants to solve your problem whether you know you have one or not. So if you do have a current tax problem, call the office or visit TaxHelpOnline.com. If you don't have a current tax problem, your current tax problem is taxes themselves. So let's get into the policy issue of today. And Trump claims he's going to eliminate taxes, income taxes that is, for people making under $150,000 a year. Is that a realistic plan? What does that look like?
It really isn't a plan at all. It's just an idea that they've thrown out there right now. I think what Trump is doing here is I think he's trying to stir up as much controversy as he possibly can. You know, the idea of controlling a negotiation is to throw out as many, for lack of a better word, radical claims as you possibly can to make your adversary start moving off their position much farther than they otherwise would. So when Trump was campaigning for the president, he was talking about eliminating taxes on Social Security. Well, that's a good idea. There's nothing radical about that. He was talking about eliminating taxes on overtime and tips, and both of those ideas are a little ways out there compared to, you know, what you would call normal tax planning type, tax strategy type things. And so it gets the adversary moving in his direction to try to minimize what they would perceive to be the damage. I think the same thing is going on here with this proposal to eliminate income taxes on those making $150,000 a year. There's no specific plan out there. All there is an allegation by Trump that this would be a good idea.
So you're saying he's using the negotiation tactic of overblowing his position in order to get, you know, them to start walking back towards where he actually wants to be in the long run. That is historically one of some of the things that he's done with his different negotiation tactics. So that does sound about right.
He uses that strategy all the time. It's called radicalizing the debate. When you radicalize the debate and you move the baseline so far one way or the other, in this case so far to the right, that it causes your adversary to naturally come closer to the position that you would be comfortable with as a means, and they do this as a means of trying to avoid the radical alternative. The left has been doing this for years, Josh. I mean, we've seen this with the Marxists going on all the time. They have been using this to their advantage. As a matter of fact, I spoke in the year 2000, I'm talking about 25 years ago, I spoke to a convention of Minnesota State Republicans at that time. That convention led to the election of Tim Pawlenty as the governor of the state of Minnesota. He served 2 terms. But we both spoke at that convention. And at that convention, I talked about the need of radicalizing the debate in Minnesota on the side of the right. And so we talked about abolishing Minnesota income taxes at that time. Wrote a study, a detailed analysis of what it would look like to abolish the Minnesota income tax. So I did my part to try to radicalize the debate in the state of Minnesota. It is a specific negotiation strategy to do that. Trump is a master at doing that, and this is what we see going on. So right now, there is no specific plan to do that, but he has been advocating. And remember now, he's advocating for the abolition of the income tax entirely. And so this is one way to get the left to start moving in his direction.
If this were a realistic option to have everybody who is making less than $150,000 a year not pay income taxes on that amount of money, what percentage of taxpayers would actually benefit?
It would be the largest segment of taxpayers. About 75% of all Americans earn less than $150,000 a year. About 75. The top 25% would be the only ones that would be faced with an income tax if this were to actually go through. And so this would be a significant tax cut for the overwhelming share of Americans. And it's funny how the left replies to this stuff. You know, they say, well, tax cuts for the rich. Every time Donald Trump, and not just Donald Trump, anytime any conservative Republican puts forth the idea of a tax cut, the left always dubs it as tax cut for the rich. And in fact, last year during the campaign, when Trump came out and said, well, we want to eliminate taxes on tips, they all started talking about how that would be just a fancy way to disguise tax cuts for the rich. How they came up with that idea, I'll never know, but it didn't take more than about a week or 2 weeks. Kamala Harris, you might recall, also then repeated the idea of eliminating taxes on tips. So it gained some purchase with the left, even after they were calling it tax cuts for the rich. Such a proposal as this, it would be very, very difficult to label them as tax cuts for the rich because, as I said, 85% of all Americans earn less than $150,000 a year.
I mean, with inflation, adjusted for inflation, $150,000 really is not that much money these days. And realistically, you know, it only takes, what, $300,000 to be in the top 5%, 10% of income earners in this country.
Yeah, so well, the top 1% is roughly about $300,000. So it's as you said, it's just not that much money. You take a family of 4, for example, husband, wife, one income, 4 members of the family, $150,000. It doesn't take you that far anymore. It's not like 150 grand back in the 1960s or 70s.
It's always entertaining to watch the mental gymnastics of trying to figure out how to take people off the payrolls of paying taxes while also complaining about tax cuts for the rich.
Whenever there's a budget debate, the question is always seems to revolve around how do we get more revenue. The problem with our federal budget is not lack of revenue, right? The federal income tax in 2024 is going to collect roughly $5.5 trillion. That's a heck of a lot of money, all right? The federal budget for the United States in the year 1900, just 125 years ago, was barely $500 million. All right, now we're talking about $5.5 trillion. I mean, it's just a massive increase in federal spending. The problem is not revenue. The problem always is spending. You know, we have a deficit this year, and in this fiscal budget is going to create a deficit of roughly about $1.2 trillion. That's the deficit, Josh. So they're spending $1.2 trillion more than they're taking in. And anytime somebody talks about cutting spending someplace, however frivolous that spending may be, however unnecessary that spending may be, people go apoplectic. They don't want anything to do with it. We see what's going on now with the reaction to the DOJ findings and the waste, fraud, and duplication that's going on with the DOJ findings. People are going crazy over the idea of cutting even a couple $100 million out of the federal budget when we're talking about $6.5 trillion of spending. So if we're going to get this budget under control, it's not just a matter of raising revenue. Raising revenue is not going to solve the problem. Based on the way the leftists spend money in the United States of America, there will never be enough revenue to satisfy their needs. All right, we have to get the budget under control. By that I mean spending. We have to get the spending under control, and it's got to be hacked. And I'm talking about hacked by about half before we start really nitpicking what's going on there. These little moves around the edges. I mean, it's important to cut the waste out, and I don't care if it's a waste of $50. We can't afford the $50, and I'm in favor of cutting it. But cutting $50 or even $500 million out of the federal budget is not going to fix the problem when we're talking about $1.2 trillion deficit.
Yeah, when there's no question that the federal government is spending way more money than realistically it should ever have capacity to spend in the first place. But, you know, all that aside, budget aside, revenue aside, what would it take in order to replace the revenue that this potential income tax cut would cause? What is the plan to replace the revenue on the books as it is?
Well, Trump's plan is to replace it with tariffs. He wants to use import duties, tariffs, as a means of raising the revenue to fund the operations of the federal government, which carries its own set of problems. You know, as I said before, we've got roughly $5.5 trillion of revenue going into the federal budget, going into the federal coffers. Only 2% of that money, Josh, is coming from tariffs right now. And you can double tariffs, you can triple them, you can quadruple them. It's not going to replace the money lost by 75% of the taxpayers dropping off the roll. So what that means is the remaining taxpayers that are on the rolls, the top 25%, would have to pay a significantly disproportional share of their significantly disproportional increase in their tax burdens to replace the revenue, assuming you can't replace it with tariffs. And I am completely convinced. In fact, I just wrote an article on this and just finished the article today, a detailed analysis of tariffs and what the burden would have to be. And as I said, you could increase the tariffs by 4, 5, 6, 7, 100%, and it would not replace the revenue lost by the income by taking that many people off the income tax. You can't raise enough money in tariffs to fund $5.5 trillion worth of spending.
Are there any other ideas that this external revenue service could potentially utilize in order to raise revenue externally from the country? I mean, they do like the idea of raising money through other people rather than the citizenry, if that makes sense.
Well, let me just say this. It is simply not true to suggest that tariffs are paid by foreign countries. That's not accurate. All right, U.S. citizens, U.S. consumers pay tariffs. All right, what happens is when a country imports a product into the United States, the tariff is assessed at the point of ingress into the country. All right, so it is the importer that pays the tariff. The cost of the tariff is added to the wholesale cost of the product. That product is then sold to distributors. You know, whoever sells their products in the United States, the big retailers, small retailers for that matter, they then set their retail prices based on their wholesale cost. Their wholesale cost includes the tariff. So when the end user purchases the product off the shelf in, let's say, Walmart, that end user is the one that ultimately paid the tariff because the price of that product includes the tariff. Now, what the tariff does is it dissuades foreign products from entering the U.S. market because they become more expensive. And if they become more expensive than U.S. produced products, then those products are going to be consumed much less by U.S. consumers. The reason is because the domestic product would be cheaper than the foreign product. And so therefore, so that in fact has the impact of reducing revenue from tariffs. It doesn't increase revenue from tariffs, it actually reduces it. And so it's counterproductive in that sense. But the fact of the matter is U.S. citizens pay the tariff. Now the question then becomes, what is more damaging to the economy, a tariff or an income tax? Well, a tariff is a consumption tax. All right, consumption taxes on balance are far less destructive to the economy than income taxes are. No question about it, because of the essential proposition that what you tax, you get less of, right? This is a fundamental principle of economics. What you tax, you get less of. When you tax income, you tax the productive component of the economy. People produce, people create jobs, people create wealth. When you tax those things, you get less jobs, you get less production, you get less wealth. You don't want to tax the things that cause economic growth, right? On the other hand, consumption does not, limitation in consumption does not necessarily limit economic growth, because people consume for all different kinds of reasons. But the fact of the matter is that consumption taxes are in fact always better and less destructive to the economy than income taxes. So in that sense, the excise tax is not a bad idea, but the problem again is raising the revenue. I'd rather see the revenue be raised through a broad-based consumption tax assessed on all consumption goods and services. The idea would be to keep tariffs low, to keep consumer prices low, to keep consumer selection, consumer choices high, consumer options high, which low tariffs do, and therefore then you have a much more vibrant economy and a better capacity to raise the essential revenue through a broad-based consumption tax.
And of course, that would then, be much broader of a base, a tax base than the income tax even is now, because it would have everybody, everybody consuming paying taxes rather than everybody who's making a certain amount of money paying taxes.
That's exactly right. And economists will tell you don't raise revenue by raising tax rates. You raise revenue by spreading the base. So when you take 75% of the people out of the tax base, that it means you just got to collect that much more revenue from the remaining 25%. So their rates go high. When their income tax rates are high, their incentive to produce goes down, right? The more a person loses to taxes, the less incentive they have to produce, because the more tax they pay. It's just natural common sense, right? People react to pain and pleasure. We know that. And so when there's pain associated with the production of income in the form of an income tax, people produce less income. That's just a simple fact of life. Whereas with consumption, you spread that base widely, you keep the rate as low as possible. That does not then create distortions in the marketplace that cause people to do things they wouldn't otherwise do, prevent them from doing things they would otherwise do.
So what is their next step? They've already put a tax plan into Congress. I don't think that it's been fully signed or passed.
No, it has not. You're right. There is a proposal in Congress. Of course, the continuing resolution was passed, but that just keeps the government alive. That didn't have anything to do with tax breaks, this or that. Of course, the president is pushing his renewal of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and I think that that's what they're going to focus on. Well, let me rephrase that. I believe that's absolutely what they have to focus on. I do not think they're going to get distracted with these kinds of things. I think, as I said at the beginning of the broadcast here, Trump has laid this out to radicalize the debate, to start bringing the left, pulling the left closer and closer to what he ultimately wants to do, which is broad-based tax cuts, not these based on the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that's already in the law.
So we're looking at a new idea rather than just a replication of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, hopefully here.
Well, the president is talking about adding things to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that would help people out further. One of the things is the elimination of the SALT cap. Right now, when I say SALT, I'm talking about state and local taxes. Right now, the ability to deduct state and local taxes is capped at $10,000. All right. And so that was put in by the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 2018. The president has talked about eliminating that, or at least raising the cap significantly, maybe to $100,000 or even $200,000. There's a lot of discussion about that. That is going to be the focus right now, is to get that bill passed. Probably going to have some items built into the bill that would benefit small businesses a little bit more. For example, increased depreciation, accelerated accelerated depreciation, a renewal of the Code Section 179 deduction that allows businesses to expense certain things that they otherwise would have to appreciate over time. So that's a significant benefit for small businesses. All of these things are going to be built into the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and the president will get more cooperation from the left to the extent that he needs it by radicalized debate saying, hey, we're going to take everybody making less than $150,000 off the tax rolls right off the top. The left is immersed in what I call tax theology. Taxes for the left are a matter of religion, right? They impose taxes on religious principles, not on economic principles, and certainly not on constitutional principles. It's a matter of religion with them. And what the religion is the idea that people can't take care of themselves. They're not smart enough to take care of their own finances. They can't take care of their own children. They can't plan for their own retirement. They can't build their own business. They can't take care of their own medical concerns. All right. People are not smart enough to take care of themselves. And so big brother government has to step in and take care of everything. And if you're not smart enough to take care of your own finances, your own medical care, and your own retirement, well, the government has to take care of all of those things. And if they're going to do that, they need all the money. All right. And so this is why they oppose tax cuts at every level. And the only effective way to oppose a tax cut is to claim that the tax cut only benefits rich people. All right. The overwhelming majority of the people in the nation are not rich. So this idea resonates. Why should rich people get a tax cut? They're already rich. The little guy should get some benefit. I'm not rich yet. All right. But the left doesn't offer any true financial opportunities for lower middle income people. What they offer is cradle to grave babysitting by big brother government. That's what they have stood for the last 50 years. Now you carry that a step further and you introduce Marxism to the equation. The idea of Marxism is the transfer of all wealth, all means of production from the private sector to the government, so the government can take care of all three essential elements of an economy. And those elements are production, distribution, and exchange. The only way they can do that is to take control of all productive elements of society. In other words, take everybody's money from them, all of it, not just a percentage of it, all of it.
So it really sounds to me, tax cuts for the rich are the only kind of tax cuts, because if you're getting a tax cut, you are by definition rich. So obviously it's tax cuts for the rich.
That's true.
If you have money, you're rich. So if you're getting a tax cut, it's a tax cut for the rich.
The perfect example of that is the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. It was demonstrably proven that 80% of the people in America got the lowest 80% of income. Let me phrase it that way, because that's the accurate way to say it. The lowest 80% of income earners received a tax cut under the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Only the top 20% of income earners saw their tax liabilities either stay the same or go up. All right. So by definition, it was not tax cuts for the rich, but for the next 8 years, that's all we heard the left pounding on, was this idea that the Trump tax law was tax cuts for his billionaire buddies. And we're hearing it again today. All Trump wants to do is give tax cuts for his billionaire buddies. Well, it's just nonsense. The mainstream media has pounded on this idea so often and for so long that the ordinary Jane and Joe American don't even question it. If the media says it's tax cuts for the rich, it must be tax cuts for the rich.
Must be true. Well, I think that's all we got for this week. So thanks for watching, taxpayers. And remember, there's no such thing as a hopeless tax case. If you think yours is the exception, call the office, visit our website, get a hold of Dan here, and he will help you see the daylight. Dan, tell them where else they can follow along with your taxpayers' rights crusade.
Yeah, absolutely. Follow me on Pullet Talks Taxes. I'm primarily on TikTok, Facebook, Truth Social, and right here on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe, like, and share these videos, especially with your federal and state government representatives. And if you have a tax problem, go to my website, TaxHelpOnline.com. You will get the help you need at my site, TaxHelpOnline.com.